Hi everyone. So unless you've been living on Venus for the last few weeks, you've probably seen stuff about the European Space Agency mission Rosetta. Now Rosetta and the small land of Philae have been travelling to a comet for the last 10 years in our solar system to study it and observe it to learn more about comets and the beginning of our solar system. So the comet 67P is something that's known as a short period comet. Now this means it's a relatively short time for it to orbit around the Sun, roughly only 6 years. And during this time it gets almost as close to the Sun as the Earth does, but it almost gets as far away from the Sun as Jupiter does. Now currently the comet is on its way towards the Sun. Now as it gets closer towards the Sun, it's going to start melting and breaking apart because comets are largely made of ice. When you get very close to the Sun, it starts heating up and starts melting and breaking apart. When this happens, the comet is known as getting very active, the active time of the comet. This is what Rosetta is hoping to do. It's hoping to study the comet as it becomes more active, as it gets closer to the Sun, as it starts breaking apart. It's going to study all the gases and the pieces of material that get thrown off of the comet as it begins to melt. This is the really interesting thing that Rosetta is trying to study. Now Rosetta spent the last few months orbiting around the comet studying it. It's been studying all the gases and liquid and material coming off the comet and around it, and it's also been studying the surface of the comet. The reason it's been doing this is to try and find a nice safe place for Philae to land. Now I want somewhere that's nice and stable that it can land, and also somewhere it can get enough light for its solar panels to charge up its batteries. So the plan was initially for Philae to be released by Rosetta and fall down towards the surface of the comet. It would have a thruster on board which would push it down into the surface of the comet, and harpoons would hold it into place on the surface. However, just before it launched, scientists found out that the thrusters weren't actually working anymore, and therefore it would just have to rely on the harpoons to hold it into place. Now this actually happened and it fell down towards the surface of the comet. Rosetta got lots of lovely images of Philae as it left the Rosetta spacecraft and then started falling down towards the surface of the comet. After a couple of hours, Philae finally reached the surface of the comet and took lots of lovely photos on the way. Now as it got very close to the surface, it was about to fire its harpoons to attach it to the surface of the comet and keep it there. However, the harpoons also failed as well as the thrusters. So what happened was that Philae actually bounced off the surface of the comet. Now luckily this was only around 40 centimeters per second, which is an incredibly slow speed. However, the gravity of the comet is so low that in fact Philae bounced very high off the surface of the comet, nearly a kilometre away from the surface. After about 2 hours of it bouncing up and down, it finally hit the surface of the comet again, bounced one more time before settling on the surface of the comet. This potentially makes Philae the world's most expensive bouncy ball. Now this obviously wasn't quite what ESA expected and wanted to do, but it did manage to finally settle onto the surface of the comet. This is the first time we'd ever landed any kind of robotic spacecraft on the surface of a comet. So the European Space Agency then had the problem of trying to find where Philae finally came to rest after it bounced 2 times. Now because it bounced so high off the surface of the comet, it could have travelled a very large distance on the surface of the comet away from where they expected it to land initially. Now luckily Rosetta took lots of images of Philae as it went down to the surface of the comet and it bounced back up. And they've been trying to model where it actually landed on the surface of the comet at the end. But they haven't still been able to manage to do it at this point, and there's a possibility that they'll never be able to manage to find exactly where Philae finally came to rest. So now that Philae landed on the surface of the comet, it's time to do lots of science. Now most of the primary science has been planned to be run on just Philae's batteries alone, but it also has some solar panels that can recharge these batteries, and this will allow it to do some secondary science and do some repeat experiments if needed. However, because Philae had bounced and it actually landed in a place they didn't expect, it landed in a ditch or a trench on the surface of the comet. Now what this meant was a lot of the solar panels didn't actually get enough light to recharge their batteries. So all the science that Philae did would have to be done just on the batteries alone. So it was a bit of a race against time to do all the science and send it back to Earth before the batteries ran out of power. The batteries lasted nearly 2 days, and in that time Philae managed to do almost all the science it wanted to do, including drilling into the surface of the comet, and it analysed the material that it dug up. It also managed to send back all this data back down to Earth so we can study it. Just before the batteries ran out, it managed to reposition itself so that hopefully the solar panels can get a bit more sunlight. Now, as the comet gets closer and closer to the Sun, it's thought that more and more sunlight will hit these solar panels and will potentially charge Philae's batteries back up, bring it back out of sleep so it can do a lot more science as it gets closer and closer to the Sun. So Philae is now asleep, but Rosetta is still doing lots and lots of science. And as the comet gets closer and closer to the Sun and gets more active, Rosetta will get a lot more science from it. And as the comet gets much closer to the Sun, it may even be that Philae gets enough light on its solar panels to wake up and to continue doing lots more secondary science, and possibly repeating some of the science it's already done. So some people are worried that Rosetta has been a bit of a failure because Philae ran out of its batteries, but this is completely not the case. Philae did loads of science, and all the primary science that it wanted to do, it managed to do on its battery life and send back all the data. Plus Rosetta is going to be spending the next few months observing the comet as it becomes more active, as it gets closer to the Sun and starts melting and breaking apart. So this mission overall has been a huge success. Thank you very much for watching, guys. I hope you enjoyed the video. Don't forget to like and subscribe to my channel. It's really, really good. I really appreciate it if you do. You can also leave comments and I'll always try and get back to them. And you can check me out on Twitter at UKAstroNut. But thanks for watching, guys, and I'll see you all soon.